Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to my next podcast. It is brought to you by PM Powered, your consulting firm on project, program, and portfolio management. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio management. So without further ado, let's get started with the failures of the week. So this week I decided to look at a large history-making project failures that has been brought to you by, let's see, most of these were done by the International Project Leadership Academy. So the first one I wanted to bring to you is the Nelson Mandela Bay Metropolitan Municipality. So as you can probably gather, it happened in South Africa. It was an integrated public transport system, and there was $130 million US dollars spent, and this happened in February of 2015. So there was a purchase of 16 buses, and it was and the Nelson Mandela Bay Metropolitan Municipality was publicly embarrassed for various reasons. The buses were purchased in 2009 as part of a program to refresh the municipal bus service in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. Although the fleet was used during the 2010 Soccer World Cup, they were parked as soon as the tournament was over, and then 6 years down the road, they still remain parked. They are just gathering dust. So what happened? Well, it was a tragedy of errors, as a matter of fact, and I wondered where the project managers and the designers were on this. So when the buses were ordered, it was forgotten that they would be letting off at a centralized median. So the doors were opening on the wrong side. The doors were opening on the right side instead of on the left side. So people were entering into traffic. The buses were too big for the bus lane that was constructed for these buses. Again, I don't understand that either. It also says reports from Port Elizabeth indicates that the flaws in the design process have resulted in bus lanes that are impractical. Remember I said they were too small, and also the bus doors were opening on the wrong side. Zebra crossings that can obstruct traffic flow, and design flaws that represent a danger to users of the system. The buses themselves typify the types of mistakes made. A faulty specification process resulted in the purchase of buses that were too big for driving lanes. How can that happen? But it did. In addition, the failure to identify the need for the drop-off of passengers to central islands, so the doors were opening on the wrong side, as I said. With funds appropriated by the South African government for the purchase of the buses, the NMBMM failed to ensure that the investment satisfied its intended long-term purpose of providing a more efficient public transport system to Port Elizabeth. So what were some of the contributing factors, as I said? Well, if we look at the model that PM Powered has created, it is a triangle. You have time at the bottom, then you have finance, and then you have variables. So in this one, finance was obviously part of the problem because they did not look at the specifications correctly, and the specifications drive finance, it also drives time, and it also drives variables. They did not look at the process very well. The process was to drop off passengers at central islands, and the doors were opening on the wrong side. How could this be? The buses were too big for the bus lanes. Now, it seems to me that they could go back and correct the bus lanes by widening them, but that wouldn't help at all with dropping off the passengers to the central lane. So here are all these buses that are just sitting there gathering dust. It seems that maybe they could at least sell the buses and recoup some of the money. But anyway, so there was dysfunctional decision making. So again, that goes to the variable side of the triangle. And as I mentioned it before in other podcasts, is one side of the triangle starts to elongate or it starts to fail, it will start falling. And when that happens, the whole triangle falls and you have a disaster of a project. And that's what happened here. There was also high staff turnovers because as things started to fail, people were let go and other people were brought on. But it was doomed for failure from the beginning. So let's go on to another one that I almost find comical. It's called the Christmas Blunderland. So what happened was in the UK, there was an assortment of Christmas-themed entertainment parks that was supposed to be open in 2008, 2013, and 2014. And the cost of this is unknown, but it's expected that the failure was pretty big since it was supposed to be an amusement park of sorts, entertainment parks based on a Christmas tree theme. So one definition of success is meeting or exceeding expectations. Satisfy expectations of the customer or stakeholder and the project is viewed as a success. Fall short of expectations, and no matter how good the product produced, the project may still be viewed negatively. Well, unfortunately, this was not even close to success on the side of the project stakeholders. As the holiday season was approached, the story illustrates the point of having to meet the expectation of your stakeholders. For the first time in recent history, a project that attempted to create some holiday magic has fallen flat on its face. The Magical Journey event at the Belfry Hotel in Sutton Coldfield, Birmingham, UK, told people that they would have a seasonal experience unlike any they had experienced before. So you can imagine going into a magic wonderland that it has a Christmas theme on it. You just think of magical things. That's not what happened here. So the advertising conjured up image of festive cheer, snow-covered landscapes, and a magical encounter with Santa and the elves. On opening day, reality and expectations unfortunately collided. There were heavy rains in the period prior to opening, hindering the project's finishing touches, and the product that's opened was a significant miss of expectations, resulting in negative feedback from the public. Of course, the event is shut down again so that the event could be polished and refined prior to its reopening. The Magical Journey is not the first such story. In 2009, a Lapland experience in the UK's New Forest shut after only a few days, and in 2013, a Winter Wonderland event at Milton Keynes, UK, also closed after a few days of unrelating. So what happened? So expectation, it was trees laid low with snow. In reality, it was a few hastily erected plastic Christmas trees in a muddy field. Expectation, elves working hard in the run-up to Christmas. Reality, a bunch of disinterested youth wearing poorly fitting costumes who were caught smoking around back of the tent. Expectation, interesting and exciting gifts. Reality, cheap plastic toys inappropriate for the receiving child. Expectation, beauty and splendor. Reality, a grotty grotto. Sorry about that. Expectation, a sled overladen with gifts pulled by reindeer. Reality, a plastic loco borrowed from the local mail, accompanied by a sad, solitary, and soggy llama. It wasn't even a reindeer, folks. It was a llama. Can you believe that? Expectation, a meeting with the jolly guy himself. Reality, a 4-hour-long queue. So variables were definitely in here. What happened to the planning? What happened to the expectations? It seems like too many corners were cut here. Although not many readers will be planning Christmas festivals, there is a broader message underlying the troubles and failures outlined above. The need to actively manage product quality and customer expectations. The quality was overlooked in this, and it caused a massive failure. I wonder if the amount of money given to this Wonderland was actually beyond the expectations. It seems like they had a set amount of money, and then when they couldn't meet expectations, shortcuts were done. And what happened was it ended up being just a disaster on a PR firm and everything else. So you had kids that were terribly upset. You had parents that were terribly upset. You had a situation that was terrible. So again, the variables on the side of this triangle started to fall. Time also started to fail because they weren't meeting expectations as far as the time commitment because people were waiting 4 hours in line. And the whole triangle just ended up failing. Okay, let's go to the next one. The next two I'm bringing to you are, one is tragic, the other one didn't have a loss of life, the first one did. But because of these tragedies, they were able to understand technology more and create safety into into the products. One is for aircraft, airlines, and the other one is for bridges. So the first one happened in 1949 to 1954. It happened in the UK. The project name was Comet. It was a commercial aircraft design and development. And for this commercial design and development, the Havilland Comet was the first jet airliner to enter commercial service, a technology leap forward. But what happened was, unfortunately, the euphoria of the first flight was soon shattered after 2 aircraft broke up in mid-flight, killing all aboard. So it was looked at, and it was decided after the inquiry that it was due to online fires. And fires aboard an aircraft are terrible. So sadly, after a few months, a 3rd aircraft broke up after they thought they had resolved the situation. Well, when it came back and they looked at it again, they realized it was the windows causing stress fractures within the aircraft hull. So they had actually square windows, and to this day, you'll find that when you go onto a commercial aircraft, go onto any, you'll see that they are not square windows. They have actually rounded corners, or there are ovals. This is because it takes off the tension at the corners of these windows, and it prevents the aircraft fatigue and stress points. So therefore, it didn't end up having cracks within the fuselage. But unfortunately for Havilland and for the UK industry, it probably ended the career of the UK industry in aircraft, not in aircraft engines, but in creating fuselages. And then after that, Boeing in the United States started taking over. So you'll now see that, as I said before, that now you'll see that all aircraft windows are either round or they have rounded edges so that they don't cause metal fatigue in the aircraft fuselage. So unfortunately, this caused a loss of life, but we learned quite a bit from it, and it's amazing to me that the inspectors were able to find out what actually happened after the 3rd accident. So let's go to the next one, which is the Tacoma Narrows. Now, if you're an engineer, you have probably studied the Tacoma Narrows. It was a suspension bridge, and it used to be called, as a joke, was called Galloping, what did they call her? Galloping Gertie. I apologize for that. While they were constructing it, the construction people felt like it was constantly oscillating and twisting, so they started calling the bridge Galloping Gertie. It was actually opened. They realized they had so many problems, so there were all kinds of design changes made while it was being built, but they still understood that there was a problem even when it was opened. So on the day of opening, it was fine. It went over. But then if you go out to YouTube and look for Tacoma Narrows Bridge, and you will see this bridge oscillating. It looks like a kid's toy that it's oscillating and moving back and forth so quickly. What they found out is that the gust of winds were creating harmonics within the bridge, which caused it to oscillate. It's the same thing as soldiers marching across a bridge. They can't do that. They let them just walk across bridge because the pounding of the feet causes an oscillation on the bridge and causes the bridge to go up and down and sideways. And this bridge actually collapsed. Fortunately, there was nobody on the bridge except for one car that had a dog in it, and I'm a dog person, and the dog did perish. It was a pet. But anyway, fortunately, there was no loss of life, and Galloping Gertie came down to its collapse to its end. The suspension bridge just fell apart because the gusts of winds were so great that it just caused too much tension within the bridge, and it fell down. Again, I'm not an engineer, so I'm probably over simplifying this, but based on what they found on this historical bridge falling, they were able to construct better oscillation and harmonics dampening within bridges from that time forward. Okay, let's go to our next one. This one is another Airbus catalog catastrophes. And this one was on the Airbus A380. It was the largest one built at the time. It was finally done in October 2007. It started in December 2000. Its wingspan is the width of a soccer pitch, and it has a two-tier, it's got a double-decker, sort of like the 747 was. But what happened to this? Why did it take so long? It took 7 years to create. And what happened was when they were starting to pull the wiring into the fuselage, it was centimeters short. In some places, in other places it was a little bit longer. But when you're in a fuselage of an aircraft, you can't just pull the wiring tighter, because then that causes catastrophe at the end. So what happened? They started going back and looking at what happened on this. And you got to understand that at this time, Airbus had merged several different countries to, because they were trying to deal with Boeing's and the Lockheed's in the United States. And they found out that the Airbus couldn't just rely on different companies coming together. So they created one company. They merged several companies into one. But they did this while they were creating the Airbus A380, and they forgot about organizational behavior and organizational change. That takes years to do, and in fact, they forgot so much that they had co-CEOs. They had a CEO from Germany and they had a CEO from France. They did not get along, and they were not doing what was right for the Airbus. They were doing what was right for feel-good of the employees. So what happened after they went back and found out it, and I may, as a project manager, have made the same decision, but I don't know that much about CADs. I would hope that I would ask enough questions about it. But anyway, it went back to the CAD/CAM. What had happened was that one group went to a newer version of the software on CAD/CAM, and one group stayed on an older version of the CAD/CAM. Theoretically, this tells me there shouldn't be a problem, but evidently there had been a massive change. It was a whole new release. It wasn't just a version. And it actually calculated things differently than the previous CAD/CAM. So when this was done, this was not taken into account, and some of the wiring was too short. Many people lost their jobs on this, including one of the CEOs. There was, they realized that they could no longer come together as one company but still act as two. They had to bring it together. They actually brought German engineers that were in charge of doing the wiring, and they sat at where the actual Airbus was being put together in France to try to figure out what was going on. And it took them a long time to figure out that it was the CAD/CAM system being used. Again, this was a lack of understanding of your tools on the project, and this should never, ever happen, especially on something that has quality and engineering and safety standards like an airplane. So I'm not sure what happened to the project managers and the engineers on this with the CAD/CAM, but obviously they had their blinders on and they were more interested in keeping winning the argument instead of doing what was best for the overall project. And the project manager should have been all over this and changing it and demanding that things be done correctly. But unfortunately, this didn't happen. And again, if you take the PM power triangle, the variables on it started to collapse, and it took a long time. And while the project ended up being successful, it was successful in the sense that it was delivered, and it is flying now, and it is a very good aircraft, and it's being used out in the fleet. But they lost billions of dollars in trying to figure out what was going on with this aircraft. Okay, let's go to one that's kind of humorous but embarrassing at the same time. This has to do with the Swedish Navy. The Swedish Navy built a flagship for its new, and this happened back in the 60s, but it's, like I said, kind of comical. They put all kinds of different ornamental statues on the back of the ship, and it created, the ship was, ended up being top heavy. They realized this when they were in port, And what they would have the crew do is run from one side of the ship to the other. And after 3 round trips of this, they realized that the ship was going to topple over, so the admiral had it stopped, but he did not stop it from going on for the maiden voyage from happening. So when they launched the maiden voyage, within 1 nautical mile, a gust of wind grabbed the ship and it capsized and it sank. This was an embarrassment for the Swedish Navy. It was embarrassment for the crew, the team that built the ship, and it was an embarrassment for the King of Sweden. So what happened on this? After they did an analysis of the root cause, it had to do with communications. They realized they had a problem. The people that were building the ship and the Navy realized there was a problem, but nobody wanted to tell the king that there was a problem. And the king was pushing to get this ship out, and he didn't want to hear about problems. So there was a kind of a shoot the messenger mentality. So because of this and nobody wanting to step up and tell the truth, they ended up having a catastrophic failure that also was an embarrassment to a whole country. And to me, that's amazing that communication is not allowed, and that the project manager wasn't able to step up and say, stop, we've got a problem. The ship was actually recovered, and it's now being used as a museum, so at least they are recovering some of their money by using it as a museum to this day. So finally, I want to talk about something I heard on NPR today. It was about the U.S. VA and the Department of Defense Medical for service members in the Department of Defense. So in the United States, when you are discharged from the military, you are now part of the VA, the Veterans Administration. Unfortunately, they cannot pass the electronic records from the DOD to the VA because they do use 2 disparate systems that don't talk to each other. About 5 years ago, they spent $1 billion, that's a B with a B, $1 billion to get both of these systems trying to talk to each other. It didn't happen. It was a complete failure. So President Trump just passed a bill that said that the VA will buy the same system as what the DOD uses. Unfortunately, it appears, it hasn't been signed yet, it's still being negotiated, but it appears that the same things that happened with the $1 billion disaster is going to happen with what's potentially a $10 billion disaster. There is no one service in charge. The DOD medical and VA medical are both co-leaders, and you can't do that because they each have their own different things that they want to do. And then the people down at the bottom that need to be able to make decisions are, again, not willing to make the decisions because they don't have the authority to do so within their organization. Also, the VA deals with a lot of civilian doctors, which the Department of Defense does not. And so that they're finding that this system that they want to use, that the DOD uses, is not really meeting the demands of what the VA needs to use. So we have one that's doomed to failure. There's also been a study that says that any project, IT project within the government that's over $10 million only has about a 10% chance of being successful. To me, those are pretty grim odds, especially since it's starting the same way as it did when it was the $1 billion catastrophe. So DOD, VA, where are you? Why are you doing this to yourselves again? You're spending my tax dollars, and I am incensed that you would do this. Get your act together. Come on, Congress, you can do it. Get them to get their act together. Put one of the departments in charge. Either put the VA in charge or put DOD in charge, and put a thumb on them so that they do it. If not, you're going to see the triangle of variables, because there's going to be all kinds of variables and nobody willing to make a decision, or they're going to have diverse needs, and nobody's going to stand up and say, okay, you've got to bite the bullet on this one. So the variables are going to cause the triangle to fall. your $10 billion is going to end up being $20 billion, so your financials are going to go down the window, and the only one that's going to make money is the software vendor and all of his subcontractors. And time is going to go by the wayside. This is not going to get done in the 5 years that you want it to get done. So my hats are not off to the government for doing this. They should have taken it in smaller chunks to make sure that it worked. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio management. This podcast has been brought to you by PM Powered, your consulting firm on project, program, and portfolio management. Please go to PM Current and follow me on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I'd love to see what you have to say about my podcast. If you are a project manager or program manager or portfolio manager on any of these items that happen, although I think the older ones are too old to have the project manager come on, but I'd love to have you speak to us about what you saw as failures, what you saw as successes, or if you disagree with my 2 cents on your project, please come and contact me on wanda@pmpowered.com. It was great to talk to you this week, and I look forward to speaking to you next week. Have a great and wonderful week.